They called them flying giraffes, creatures so tall they could look a T-Rex in the eye, then leap and own the sky. Giant pterosaurs shouldn't exist, at least not by our everyday intuition. And yet, for millions of years, they strode across floodplains like stilt-legged hunters, then vaulted into the air with wings as wide as small aircraft. This is the improbable story of how physics, anatomy, and evolution conspired to make the biggest flying animals the planet has ever seen. Before we learn how they launched, hunted, or vanished, meet the animals themselves. They were not dinosaurs and not birds, but close cousins to both within the larger Archosaur clan. Imagine a family tree where crocodiles branch one way, dinosaurs and birds branch another, and a third branch, thin and improbable, rises into the wind. That third branch is the pterosaurs, and among them, the Ajdarchids were the giants. When people call them flying giraffes, it isn't just flair for thumbnails. On the ground, the tallest of them could raise their heads to second-story windows. In the air, they carried wingspans that would fill a tennis court's baseline to baseline. They were contradictions on stilts, ultralight bones wrapped in armor-strong walls, dainty feet beneath spear-length beaks, long columnar necks balanced over torsos as trim as a marathoner's. Picture one at rest on a late Cretaceous floodplain. The body is surprisingly compact, a muscular kite with a deep chest for anchoring flight engines, and a long, stiffened wing membrane ready to unfurl. The forelimbs dominate the silhouette, because for these animals the forelimb wasn't just a wing, it was the front leg as well, a dual-purpose strut built for both walking and soaring. The fingers are mostly small, but one finger is outrageous, the fourth digit stretched into a living spar that could support a membrane wider than your living room. The skin of that wing isn't just skin, it's a living fabric threaded with microscopic fibres that kept the aerofoil tense and tuned, more hang glider than bedsheet. Along the body, a halo of fine, hair-like fuzz, pycnofibres, softens the outline. It isn't fur, not exactly, but it holds heat, manages airflow, and hints at a metabolism tuned far higher than a lizard's lazy idle. Now let your gaze ride up the neck. In most animals, long means fragile, but these necks were structural miracles. Each vertebra is light, airy, and riddled with internal struts, a cathedral of bone engineered to keep the head steady while cutting mass to the edge of possibility. The head it holds is likewise stripped of waste. Teeth are mostly gone in these giants, traded for a long toothless beak that's fast to swing, quick to stab, and easy to keep light. In some species, a crest rises from the skull, a billboard of keratin that may have signaled species, sex, or maturity, and likely helped fine-tune stability in the air. Nothing is showy without purpose. Even the drama has engineering behind it. Names help us see them as individuals. Quetzalcoatlus, the Texas giant, is the poster creature, a long-necked, long-beaked Ajdarchid with a wingspan that could eclipse a small plane. Arambourgiania, with vertebrae like stretched spools, haunts the deserts of the Middle East in our imagination. Hatzegopteryx from the island of Hateg might be the odd one out, built more like a heavyweight than a high-stepper, skull and neck tuned for power rather than reach. Each name is a window into a landscape and a lifestyle, river systems teeming with fish and carrion, island plains scattered with herds of dwarf dinosaurs, wind fields rising over hot valleys at noon. They're global in spread and yet local in character, adapted to the ground they owned as much as to the air they ruled. On the ground is where the giraffe in their nickname truly makes sense. Walk with one, and the gait is a calm, four-limbed pace, not the awkward hop you might imagine from a winged creature. The hands touch down knuckle first, the hind feet follow in a measured rhythm, and the neck sweeps like a periscope, left, right, down, tasting the world with a razor's edge of beak. Far from clumsy, they are deliberate. Long limbs keep the body high above scrub and mud. The posture is efficient, almost elegant, saving energy for the moments that matter. You can feel how a landscape would change under their watch. Small animals keep to cover a little longer, Scavengers wait their turn a little farther back, and juveniles of anything, theropods, mammals, lizards, learn to freeze at the pterosaur's shadow. Size is the headline, but it isn't the whole story. Scale up any flying machine and the math fights you. Area grows slower than mass, muscle power doesn't keep pace with weight, and air feels thicker and trickier at the speeds you can still manage. These animals solve those equations with careful economics. Bones are inflated with air and buttressed by dense outer walls. Mass is sunk into the muscles that matter, stripped from the ones that don't. The chest is a keel for flight muscles, the shoulders a hinge that takes punishment and returns control. The neck isn't an indulgent ornament, it's a reach extender, a targeting boom that allows a walking hunter to place the beak exactly where it needs to be without stepping into danger or wasting motion. Everything unnecessary is shaved away, everything essential is reinforced. Their bodies are a masterclass in saving grabs and spending them where they buy performance. Even their life history seems tuned to this balancing act. Hatchlings, small and light with proportionally large wings, may have been capable flyers shockingly early, dispersing across safe thermals the way dandelion seeds ride a breeze, if a dandelion seed could steer. As they grew, their relationship with the ground deepened. The oldest, heaviest adults likely became more terrestrial in emphasis, trading frequent flapping for intelligent walking and strategic soaring. In every stage, the animal's body and behaviour are in dialogue with physics. What you hunt, how far you range, when you take off, where you land, all decided by wind, heat and weight. Close your eyes and situate them in time. It's the late Cretaceous, the last act before the curtain falls. Dinosaurs still dominate the megafauna cast list, but birds are diversifying and experimenting in forests, marshes and coastlines. The sky isn't empty even before noon, it's layered. Small birds flicker from tree to tree. Mid-sized pterosaurs ride the morning thermals, and then, as the land warms and the air begins to heave upward in thick invisible columns, the ajdachids step forward. They are not frantic animals. They wait for the sky to pay them a dividend, a rising current, a line of lift along a ridge, and then cash it in for miles of silent travel. You do not see them all the time, but you feel their governance over the open places. They are horizons moving. What makes them so compelling is that they break our intuitive rules twice. First, they are walkers that own the air. Second, they are giants that remain nimble. We're used to thinking in tidy categories. Flyers flap, runners sprint, heavy things lumber. But these reptiles blur those lanes. They flip between roles because their anatomy lets them, and because their world rewards that flexibility. A carcass appears downwind. A shoal of hatchling dinosaurs emerges along a sandbar. A thermal builds over sun-baked gravel. The animal that can be tall when it needs reach, low when it needs stealth, grounded when it saves energy, and airborne when opportunity demands, that animal wins the day. That animal is an ajdashid. If you need a single image to hold them in your mind, choose this. Dawn haze lifting off a river valley, reeds ticking in a light breeze, the silhouette of a creature standing higher at the head than any predator nearby, neck cocked, waiting. It has the patience of a heron, the reach of a crane, the wing of a sailplane, and the quiet confidence of something that knows it can leave, immediately, on its own terms. That is why they feel unreal, why they read like myth when we try to describe them. They sit precisely at the limit of what air will tolerate and land will support, and they make that limit look routine. Meet the sky giants, and relearn what possible means. Start with the problem every giant flyer must solve, the square cube law. As size increases, weight rises faster than wing area and muscle power. Most animals hit that wall and stop. These reptiles rerouted around it with design choices that look like they were made on an engineer's whiteboard. They drove mass out of the places where it caused penalties and concentrated strength where forces really flow. Seen up close, they're a cathedral of struts and shells, air spaces and tensioned membranes, each decision shaving grams and adding safety margins until flight becomes not only possible, but routine. The skeleton is the foundation of the trick. Bones are hollow, but not flimsy. The walls are thicker than a bird's at comparable diameters and reinforced with internal trabecula that act like cross-bracing in a bridge. This buys resistance to bending and torsion without paying a heavy weight tax. Across the shoulders, a fused block of vertebrae, the notarium, locks the base of the neck and the rib cage into a single unit, so the violent loads of takeoff and maneuvering don't twist the torso out of tune. The shoulder girdle itself is a single scapular coracoid strut. Its joint surface faces in a way that stabilizes the wing root through the entire stroke, channeling force into the chest rather than into sloppy rotations that waste energy. The sternum carries a deep keel for massive flight muscles, and the humerus announces its job with an outsized deltopectoral crest, an anchor for the engine that drives the wing. Follow that wing outward and you meet their signature solution, the fourth finger stretched into a living spar with phalanges that telescope into an airworthy beam. It sounds absurd until you notice the rest of the architecture around it. The leading edge isn't just skin, it's governed by a special bone, the pteroid, that supports a foremembrane in front of the arm. By changing the tension of that foremembrane, the animal can tweak camber and leading edge shape like a pilot adjusting a slat. Behind the arm and finger lies the main wing membrane, a layered aerofoil laced with microscopic fibres, actinofibrils, that run at different angles. Those fibres prevent ballooning, resist tearing, and let the wing change stiffness with load. Slack and compliant at low speeds to resist stalling, firmer under tension when the air starts to bite. Tendons and small muscles along the forelimb and body alter that tension on the fly. The result is a flexible wing that behaves like a smart material, self-stiffening, self-healing in its aerodynamics, without the heavy hinges and flaps metal aircraft would need to do the same job. Mass budgeting shows up everywhere you look. Teeth vanish in the biggest forms, replaced by a long keratin-sheathed beak, fast to swing, slow to fatigue. Crests look theatrical, but the materials are cheap, keratin and light bone, and a small bit of surface up front can help with trim and yaw stability, the way a vertical fin helps a glider hold its nose to the wind. The tail is reduced because the centre of mass is already tucked close to the shoulder joint where wings can best control it. A long heavy tail would only undermine that balance. Even the pelvis wears an extra pair of bar-like bones, the prepubes, that help brace the abdomen and give muscles a handle for breathing mechanics, offloading some motion from the ribs so the chest can be optimised as a flight engine. The neck is a structural thesis of its own. Ajdahid cervicals are elongated tubes with internal strutwork, shaped to resist the specific sins that plague long beams, buckling when compressed, flutter when vibrated, and droop when cantilevered. The vertebrae lock together with broad joints, spreading loads across generous surfaces instead of point contacts. This lets the animal hold a heavy beak steady while walking, and still snap that same beak through an arc in a hunting strike without the neck folding or whipping out of control. Long doesn't mean weak when the material is placed where the stress is run. Cut into the bones and you find the next big play, air. Evidence for pneumatic invasion. Air sacs reaching into the skeleton points to a respiratory system closer to a bird's bellows than to a mammal's dead-end lungs. Air moves through a loop, and sacs in the body and possibly in the wing bones lighten the frame while powering high-flow, high-efficiency gas exchange. That's a 2-for-1. Lower weight and a metabolism that can keep muscles fed during heat, thirst, and long soaring days. Around the body, a coat of pycnofibers traps warmth, smooths boundary layers, and hints at thermal budgets running too hot for a lizard's sluggish chemistry. Bone microstructure in many pterosaurs shows rapid, sustained growth, another flag for high-octane physiology. Big flight demands big oxygen delivery and quick repairs. Their tissues look built to meet both. Walk down to the ground and the impossible machine keeps clarifying. The hands contact the earth on the outer joints. knuckle walking while the giant wing finger folds up and away like a stowed mast. The forelimb is proportioned to take compression, not just tension. The radius and ulna are stout, the wrist complexly locked, and the humerus shaped to resist twisting as weight passes from the body into the substrate and back again. Hind limbs are long and capable, aligning under the body to keep the gait narrow and efficient rather than sprawling. Trackways show a confident 4-beat walk with even spacing, no drunken waddling, no desperate hopping. This ground competence is part of the flight system. A stable base lets the animal preload tendons and muscles, set wing angles precisely before commitment, and move across terrain with negligible energy cost while waiting for the sky to offer lift. All of these parts live under the rule of aerodynamics that care about size. At giant scales, wing loading creeps up and stall speeds won't stay low unless the wing grows broader or smarter. They chose smarter. Variable camber from the foremembrane, fibre-biased stiffness in the main wing, and fine control at the wrist help keep the effective angle of attack gentle when creeping along and crisp when banked and fast. High aspect ratios reduce induced drag during climb and cruise. Planforms vary among species, but the big Ajdarkids skew toward efficient soaring rather than frantic flapping. The whole flight envelope seems tuned to a lifestyle of exploiting thermals, slope lift and boundary layer features, using the atmosphere's free energy instead of trying to brute force the air with muscle alone. There's a nervous system and sensory piece to the design too. Large eyes forward on a long skull give the animal reach and perception to match reach and anatomy. You need to see eddies in grass, ripple lines on water, and subtle brightness gradients that suggest a rising column of hot air. Inner ear canals and head-neck proprioception keep that tall, top-heavy sensor suite stable, so visual information remains crisp while the rest of the body makes micro-adjustments. A stabilized gaze is not a luxury for a soaring hunter. It is the difference between reading the wind and being written by it. If you pull back further, you can see the systems thinking at work. Strength flows along the same lines as force. Hollow tubes fight bending, fused blocks resist twist, long levers are counterweighted by mass trimmed elsewhere. The soft tissues echo the bones. Fibers align where stresses travel. Membranes thicken where pressures spike. Muscles cross joints at angles that turn short contractions into useful rotations. Even life history shadows the blueprint. Youngsters pay into the account with rapid growth and high repair rates. Adults cash out efficiency, leaning on environmental energy, sun-pumped thermals and ridge winds, to cover the costs of being enormous and airborne. The genius is not a single magic feature, but the way dozens of ordinary-seeming features interlock. Lighter skull plus reinforced neck equals fast, accurate strikes without structural penalties. Fused shoulder plus huge delta pectoral crest equals a motor mount that doesn't wobble under peak torque. Air sacs plus insulating fibers equal high aerobic ceilings without cooking the engine. A variable stiffness wing plus a fine tunable leading edge equals low stall speeds when needed and low drag when desired. None of these on its own beats the square cube law. Together they bend it just enough. Stand under one as it spreads its wings and you can feel those compromises line up. The chest lifts but doesn't heave. The wing unfurls with a tensioned snap rather than a sagging flop. The neck steadies like a camera gimbal as the head picks a reference point on the horizon. There's no spare ornament, no clumsy overbuild. It's a glider that can walk, a walker that can pole vault, an animal that treats air like a material it knows how to shape. If the phrase flying giraffe makes you smile, the engineering underneath it should make you quiet. This is how you make the largest flyer in Earth's history, not by breaking the rules, but by obeying all of them at once. Imagine a landscape of bare floodplains, braided rivers, and wide grassy flats broken by low scrub. This is not a forest animal's world. It rewards height, patience, and a talent for seeing small movements over long distances. That's where the giants excel, On the ground, they are measured and economical, moving on all fours with the confidence of an animal that knows it can leave the scene vertically at any moment. The forelimbs plant first, knuckle down, followed by the hind feet in an easy, even rhythm. There's no fluster to it. The neck floats above like a boom crane, the head sweeping slow arcs over sedge clumps, driftwood, burrows, and ripple marks where tiny lives reveal themselves by accident. Their territory is the open, sunlit in-between, too exposed for timid prey, too dry for crocodiles, not dense enough for ambush cats that don't exist yet, perfect for a tall, sharp-eyed stalker. The old picture of giant pterosaurs as ocean skimmers doesn't hold up here. Their skulls and bodies aren't tuned to drag a jaw through the water at speed. Instead, watch how the beak behaves on land. It hovers, points, dips, and jabs, the way a heron works a shoreline. Only this shoreline might be the edge of a dinosaur nesting ground, or the seam between dry gravel and damp mud where insects and small vertebrates concentrate. Much of the hunt is information gathering. The animal pauses frequently, head cocked, reading surface textures and listening. A sudden freeze in the grass, a flicker under a mat of reeds, a little trail of pressed down stems, each is an invitation. The strike, when it comes, is short and decisive. A lizard, a hatchling dinosaur, a snake, a burrowing mammal, anything sized for a quick grab and swallow is fair game. When the pickings run lean, the giant becomes an honest scavenger, walking a straight line to the wind's answer to a simple question: where does it smell wrong? A carcass on an open plain is a buffet with rules. The pterosaur uses its height to watch for approaching competition, opens a seam with the beak, and eats efficiently until the calculus of risk changes. Their daily routine follows the air. Early morning is for walking hunts, when thermals haven't developed and moving on foot costs least. Midday, as the ground heats and columns of rising air roll off the flats, is for travel. A few steady steps, a coiled crouch, and the animal vaults up on its forelimbs, clearing the ground in an explosive hop, wing membranes snapping open with preloaded tension. Once the climb is bought and paid for, the rest is free. A drift from one thermal to the next, a slow spiral to altitude, then a long shallow glide that turns 20 kilometers of ground into an hour's casual survey. Landings return them precisely where footwork matters, downwind of a dead hadrosaur, along a river's inside curve where minnows are trapped in warm pools, across sandbars where hatchlings leave neat trains of footprints to the water's edge. They don't need to do everything in the air because they are better at the ground than almost any flyer that ever lived. The open country lifestyle favours a particular body language. They carry themselves high, not to look impressive but to see more horizon with fewer steps. The neck is a periscope, yes, but also a measuring stick. It lets them probe without committing their feet, keeps their eyes and nostrils above swampy ground, and reaches into tight places where the rest of the body would bog down or be exposed. When moving through taller grass or low brush, the head bobs to keep a stable visual reference while the torso glides. Predators test the unwary by forcing mistakes. These walkers make few. They halt often at vantage points, bare hummocks, exposed roots, the upwind edges of dried ponds, to take long, unmoving reads of the land. A minute spent watching can save 10 in pointless steps. On islands like the Hatzeg Basin, their role may expand from opportunist to heavyweight. The local dinosaurs trend small, the mammal fauna opportunistic, the predators fewer and more specialised. A giant with a robust neck and skull, think of the heavy-set profile often argued for Hatzegopteryx, has options. It can dominate a carcass, bully smaller meat-eaters off a kill, and risk short lunges at prey larger than a mouthful. That doesn't make it a chase predator. It makes it an ambush-minded landlord, using reach and sudden acceleration over short distances where the terrain funnels movement. Dry gullies, game trails through scrub, and the edges of seasonal waterholes become stages for these brief, violent negotiations. Whether hunter or scavenger at any given moment, it sits very near the top of the list of animals others must consider. Social life in the open is dictated by visibility. If there is gathering, it's probably around resources: a swarming shoreline, a mass nesting ground of smaller reptiles or birds, a river that shrinks to connected pools as the season dries. Several giants might share the same general area at comfortable spacing, each keeping a personal bubble that moves with it like a tide line. They don't need to quarrel much. Height, posture, and a few sharp beak gestures handle most boundary disputes. When juveniles are present, you see the strategy of scale at work. Smaller, lighter individuals range farther at mid-morning and late afternoon, using weaker thermals and tolerating rougher ground to avoid direct competition. Larger adults save energy with slower, longer legs and fewer takeoffs, picking higher quality patches even if that means waiting for noon's stronger lift. The ground itself is a document of their competence. Where their feet crossed wet mud, the prints read like tidy punctuation, 4 impressions slightly ahead and to the side of the hind impressions, claws scribed in neat arcs, stride lengths that barely vary over long distances. No slips, no wild gouges that would betray frantic movement. Even the path tells a story, long straight segments when traversing poor ground, broken by denser looping work when they find pay dirt. These loops often skirt ecotones, the places where one habitat grades into another, because edges concentrate life. A shoreline is an edge. The border between high grass and clipped grazing flats is an edge. The line where a river has recently fallen and left behind stranded pools is an edge. The giants read edges like experienced foragers in any era do. Competition is part of that reading. A mid-size predatory dinosaur on the same plane is a problem only at close quarters. At a distance, height and wings solve it. The pterosaur notes wind direction, gives itself a few meters of clear runway, more mental than physical, and stays upwind when possible. If challenged, it doesn't bluff with noise or display. It leaves, straight into the safe layer of air it understands better than its rival understands legs. Even without taking off, it can make itself awkward to attack by rotating to keep the head as a forward-facing blade and the long wing bones are lined to absorb shoves. Predators prefer easy geometry. The giants arrange the scene so the geometry is bad. Weather sets the schedule as much as anything else. On gusty days, the animals hug the leeward sides of low rises, using the wind's own curl to mask scent and movement. After a storm, they comb the flats for drowned or injured animals and for debris fields, where small creatures have been swept into concentrates. In heat waves, most of the hunt happens early and late. In cool spells, they stay in motion longer, because the cost of walking goes down as the need for cooling goes down. Their metabolism gives them room to choose strategy by conditions rather than by desperation. That's what kingship looks like here. Options. Look closely at how they handle food on the ground. The beak isn't a crude spear, it's a set of long, light levers with sensitive tips. They can snip, lift, and shake. A small mammal pulled from a burrow gets a swift snap and swallow. A larger item is worked from the edges to the middle, the way a bird dismantles prey it can't gulp whole. When scavenging, they avoid deep plunges that would blind them inside a carcass, and instead open windows between ribs and skin, feeding with the head sideways so one eye always watches the margins. They step carefully around blousy parts of a rotting animal that might entangle a foot. You see the same practiced habits, over and over. A choreography honed by animals that cannot afford a tendon injury, a slip, or a bad bite. What they don't do is as telling as what they do. They don't sprint after healthy fast prey across open ground. That's a losing game for long levers and light bones. They don't rely on tight maneuvers in cluttered places where wings become liabilities. They don't waste effort when wind and heat will work for them in an hour. The open country rewards restraint and timing. It belongs to animals that can wait, reposition, and capitalize. The giants are superbly built for that logic. They treat the plane as a moving puzzle where the pieces, wind, shade, water, footpaths, scent trails, keep changing, but the rules stay the same. In the end, watching them on foot is what makes their scale feel plausible. Flight explains how they range. Walking explains how they live. They turn miles of empty-looking ground into a map of opportunities by applying height, reach, and patience. Where smaller hunters must choose between hiding and hurrying, these reptiles choose to see. The sky is their highway, yes, but the earth is their workshop. Out here, with space to scan and time to pick their moments, the flying giraffes are not just visitors from the air, they're the ruling stride. Start with the launch window, because for a giant that window matters. On the ground, the animal waits for the air to turn generous. Wind a little on the nose, a ripple of rising warmth lifting grass heads. The telltale shimmer that means a thermal is breathing. It walks a few deliberate steps to a patch of firm earth, clears scrub with a sidestep, and squares itself to the wind the way a sailplane pilot lines up a toe. Nothing about this is hurried. Flight is physics plus timing, and timing saves muscle. The setup is a full-body coil. Forelimbs plant slightly ahead, elbows flexed, wrists braced. Hind limbs tuck in to load the springs of hips, knees, ankles. The spine stiffens through a fused shoulder and back block, so that when force moves, it moves cleanly. Think of it as 4 pistons around a light, rigid frame. At a small internal cue the sequence fires. Hind limbs drive first to nudge the centre of mass forward and upward, then the forelimbs explode, shoulder unhinging, elbow extending, wrist snapping through its locked range. The animal pole vaults off its own arms. Because those arms are the same structures that power the wings, they are massively overbuilt for this instant. The deltapectoral crest on the humerus and the fused shoulder act like a catapult's axle and housing. In a creature this size, running takeoffs would punish joints and waste time. A quadrupedal vault buys clean clearance in a single bound. During the vault, the wings are not yet wide barn doors. They're half furled, membranes tensioned, reducing drag until the body is actually airborne. Mid-leap, the 4th finger straightens. The propategium along the leading edge tightens under the pteroid's guidance, and the main membrane snaps to its flight shape. That snap is not floppy fabric. Microscopic fibres in the skin align the aerofoil, keeping the edge sharp and the camber honest from the very first beat. The first downstroke is a committed event. Shoulders drive, elbows and wrists coordinate to hold the span open, and the chest's big flight muscles dump stored chemical work into airspeed. The goal is simple and non-negotiable: get above stall. 2 or 3 authoritative beats, helped by ground effects cushioned just above the surface, are usually enough. Ground effect is free lift. The wing's vortex can't fully form against the earth, so drag drops and the same stroke buys more speed and height. Giants use it the way seabirds do, skimming, gathering margin, then climbing when the wing can afford it. A bad launch wastes energy. A good launch joins a pattern the sky already drew. If there's a slope, the animal will use it, stepping off a lip into thicker air like a cliff glider. If there's a headwind, it will take it square, because wind on the nose is lift in the bank. If the plane is dead calm, it may walk a bit farther to a place where baked ground has had longer to build a thermal. The art is to spend muscle only until the atmosphere starts paying dividends. Once that first circle bites into rising air, the wing beat relaxes, and the flight becomes bookkeeping, trading altitude, time and distance with the careful frugality of a long-range traveller. Climbing in a thermal looks unhurried from the ground, but up close it's constant adjustment. The inside wing runs a slightly higher angle of attack. The outside wing eases off to keep the bank clean. The wrist and leading edge membrane change tension to keep the inner panel from stalling at the top of each turn. The neck is not dead weight. Tilt the head a few degrees and you nudge yaw. Pull it slightly down and you move the centre of pressure forward for a momentary trim change. A crest, cheap in mass but big in surface, may add a whisper of weather vane stability. Each circle is a conversation with invisible air. If the variosense, eye, inner ear, skin, says the climb rate is fading, widen the circle. If it strengthens, tighten until the inner wing hints at buffet, then ease a touch. 3, 5, 10 loops later, and the animal is a few hundred meters above the plane, the world organized into options. Cruise is a study in efficiency. High aspect ratio wings, light but stiff spars, and membranes that automatically firm under tension turn muscle work into kilometers. The glide is shallow, sink rates are low, the head barely moves. Over sun-streaked ground, the animal hops from one bubble of rising air to the next, connecting a dotted line of invisible elevators, fields with darker soil, gravel bars, the lee side of low bluffs where air curls upward. Over ridges, slope lift does the same job without circles. Face into the wind, ride the hill's deflected flow, and let the terrain pay your climb. Inland, thermal soaring dominates. Along coasts or escarpments, the same animal might spend whole afternoons riding laminar updrafts with a single lazy wing beat, every few minutes to keep speed where drag is happy. Control at this scale is subtle because big wings punish crude moves, bank with the whole arm and finger, fine-tune with the wrist and the leading edge, dump speed by flexing the elbow and thickening camber, gain a few knots by flattening the profile and easing the nose down. A small side slip can move you laterally without blowing a climb. A gentle ruddering from neck and head can clean up a crosswind approach without heavy roll input. With a reduced tail, the head-neck system and the wing's tip geometry do a lot of what a bird's tail would do: trim, damping, last-second course cleaning. The result is a flight style that looks calm because the corrections are baked into the materials. When the load spikes, fibers stiffen. When the load eases, the membrane relaxes and forgives tiny errors. Speed choices follow the air's moods. In smooth, fat thermals, slow down to maximize climb. Angle of attack up, sink down, circle tight. In rough, broken lift, carry a little extra speed for stability. A few body lengths per second more and the bumps turn from threat to texture. Crossing blue holes, stretches with no evident lift, means accepting a steeper glide and hunting visually for cues. Dust devils, hawks already climbing, smoke leaning, sun angle on ploughed strips. Nothing here is mystical. It's habit stacked on perception. The same skill set a vulture or stork uses, scaled up and tuned to membranes instead of feathers. Distance is not an afterthought, but the point. A giant that can launch with little fuss and turn midday heat into height can survey entire watersheds in an hour. River bends glittering with trapped fish, colonies of smaller reptiles pulsing with new hatchlings, carcasses telegraphing their location by the way the wind smells. The wing buys time to choose. If the pick is poor below the first thermal, don't land. If it's good, spiral down, bleed speed with a flare and walk the ground like a patient heron on stilts. The cycle, walk, vault, soar, choose, descend, unfolds with the clockwork of weather. On some days that cycle runs once, on others 3, 4, 5 times, the animal making triangles across the plane that a GPS would render into neat polygons around resources. Landing, like launching, is choreography with margins. Come in a little upwind so the ground speed stays low. As the surface rises toward you, raise the nose by tightening the leading edge and ever so slightly increasing camber. Ground effect meets you again, lift swells, then collapses if you push too far. So you ride that cushion until the legs can take load. Touchdown sequence likely favours the hind feet first to set a tripod with the forelimbs a heartbeat later, or forelimbs first if the angle demands. But either way, the aim is to turn forward momentum into a brief controlled roll on forelimbs, rather than a jarring stab on two. The wing doesn't just stop, it becomes a brake. Flex the elbow, slacken the membrane, and its smooth aerofoil turns into drag cloth that kills the last bits of speed. A few quick steps, a fold of the fourth finger, and the sky is neatly stowed against the body. No drama, no skid marks, just a big animal back in its element on foot. Not every landing is on a friendly plane. On cobbles, the animal targets the smoother patches it scouted from height. On damp flats, it aims for the firmer halo around reed beds. On broken lava or thorn scrub, it may simply not land at all, choosing instead to drift to a better field while there's still sun. Big flyers learn to say no. A bad surface can maim a joint that took years to build. A missed cue in a gust can twist a wing you cannot repair. So they budget caution the way they budget calories. The impossible part of all this dissolves when you watch the sequence as a system. The ground isn't separate from the air. Ground effect stitches them. Launch and landing are not exceptions to flight, but phases optimized by the same anatomy. Soaring isn't a luxury, but the main leg of a commute designed by weather. Even the supposed weaknesses, long neck, toothless beak, light bones, turn into tools when the whole routine is about doing only the necessary work. The neck trims and steers, the beak reduces mass at the business end. The light bones make both launch and circling possible on a hot day when dense air won't help you. There are days when the sky won't cooperate. Cold mornings after storms, season shifts when thermals are anemic, winds that shear and scatter lift into noise. On those days, giants act like walkers first. They hunt on foot, delay long flights, and save the big crossings for hours when the sun has repaired the atmosphere's staircase. And then there are the perfect days, when the plane sparkles with updrafts and the air smells of heat. On those days you can stand very small under a very large wing and listen to almost nothing. No engine, no frantic beating, just the soft tension of a living sail loading and unloading, as an animal rides the sky the way a practiced hand rides a horse, by feel, with respect, spending strength only when touch will not do. The end didn't begin with a predator, but with a rock from space. One bright day at the close of the Cretaceous, about 66 million years ago, an asteroid hit what's now the Yucatan. Shockwaves raced across continents, wildfires flashed from horizon to horizon, tsunamis erased coasts, and a planet's worth of dust, sulfates and soot climbed into the sky. Days darkened to a long, choking twilight. Temperatures lurched. Photosynthesis stalled. The first casualties were plants and the things that needed them immediately. The next casualties were everything that needed those things. In that sudden, ugly arithmetic, the giants of the air lost the margins they had spent millions of years optimizing. Take away sunlight and you don't just starve leaves, you change the behavior of air. Thermals, the invisible elevators, giant pterosaurs turned into free altitude, collapsed or weakened for long stretches. Wind patterns shifted and stalled. Even on days when flying was still physically possible, the economy of flight broke. More flapping, less soaring, worse returns on every calorie. Ajdarkids could walk superbly, but their large bodies and high operating costs were built around a world that offered dependable lift at midday and predictable food on the ground. The impact winter cut both. For a brief window, the catastrophe made scavengers rich. Carcasses lay everywhere, fish stranded in shrinking waters, dinosaurs felled by heat and smoke, whole food chains snapping at once. The big stalkers would have walked to those wind-carried signals and fed with their usual efficiency. But the same shock that produced that banquet also destroyed its renewal. When carrion is no longer replaced by living prey, when small animals vanish and nesting grounds go silent, a large-bodied forager is burning through a pantry with no restocking. Each new day after the impact brought fewer opportunities and demanded more travel to find them. Their life history amplified the trap. Giants tend to breed slowly. They take longer to grow, reach maturity later, and likely lay fewer clutches per year than quick-cycling birds. Low population densities mean fewer pairs spread thin over wide ranges. In good times, that's fine. In bad times, it's fatal. You can ride out a short drought with a slow strategy. You can't ride out a planetary winter that lasts months to years. Even if a few adults survived the first shock, the pipeline of juveniles behind them would have been thin. A couple of failed seasons erase a lineage when your replacement rate limps. Meanwhile, the winners of the bottleneck were not the strongest in an action movie sense, but the most flexible in a bookkeeping sense. Among birds, small-bodied lineages that could eat seeds, detritus, or anything stored and inert had a hedge against the dark. Seeds persist when leaves don't. Tubers, nuts, and hard-shelled leftovers hold calories through bad weather. Ground-hugging habitats like wetlands and river margins provided micro-refugia, places where food webs bent instead of snapping. Short generation times let those survivors adjust quickly by sheer demographic momentum. More babies, more bets, more chances. That doesn't make birds better than pterosaurs. It makes them better fitted to this particular role of the planetary dice. There's a scale story here too. By the late Cretaceous, small and mid-sized aerial niches were increasingly crowded by birds that could maneuver in cluttered habitats and reproduce quickly. Pterosaurs still included small forms in some places, but the global trend favoured very large ajdarchids, terrestrial stalkers, long rangers, specialists in open country economies. Specialisation is a ladder that climbs fast and high. It also means there's farther to fall when the rung breaks. After the impact, the set of conditions that kept the biggest pterosaurs viable, reliable thermals, abundant small vertebrates, broad safe landing fields, long search flights that paid back, shrank, fragmented and flickered. What vanished was not just a roster of species but a flight style. In the Paleogene skies that followed, the air filled again, first with birds exploring every imaginable wing planform, later with bats feeling their way through nocturnal insect booms. Great soarers re-evolved among birds, pelagornithids with saw-toothed beaks and immense wingspans, and land giants like Argentavis that rode thermals over South American uplands. They were magnificent, but still shy of the biggest pterosaurs in sheer scale, and in the way their bodies solved launch and landing. No bird has the pterosaur's quadrupedal vault. No bird carries a membrane wing that stiffens itself with load. The blueprint for flying giraffes ended with them. All that remains are the signatures in stone and a thin line in the rock. A razor-thin smear of iridium marks the bad day globally. Above it, pterosaurs are gone. Below it, they are still there, rare because their bones were light and fragile in life, but unmistakable when preserved. In Texas, long neck bones and air-filled wing spars testify to Quetzalcoatlus' improbable dimensions. In Romania's former island, the heavy-built bits of Hatzegopteryx hint at a very different solution to the same hunting problem. In the Middle East, Aramborgiania's absurdly elongated cervical bone stretches the imagination about how tall a hunter can be and still function. Footprints on ancient mudflats, neat 4-beat punctuation marks, say they walked with the same calm economy we infer from their bones. Then the layer hits, the story stops, and yet they continue, inside our machines and ideas. Engineers talk about putting material where the loads go. That's what hollow bones with thick walls do. Aerospace designers chase morphing wings and aeroelastic tailoring, structures that stiffen with load instead of collapsing. The giant membranes did that 40 fossilized million mornings ago. Glider pilots rid sky texture, dust devils, cloud streets, ridgelines, the way a pterosaur must have read heat shimmer and wind-bent grass. Ground effect, variable camber, energy management by weighting rather than forcing. Their habits map onto the checklists of efficient flight today. Even robotics labs borrow the logic of their launch, store elastic energy in compliant elements, and release it in a single controlled pulse. They continue in the stories we tell. A name like Quetzalcoatlus yokes science to myth. The feathered serpent of Mesoamerica, reborn as a reptile that sailed the Texas sky. Museum mounts lift a child's gaze and quietly renegotiate what big can mean. Artists lean into the contradiction of a giraffe that's also a kite. Filmmakers give a silhouette sipping from rivers at dusk like cranes scaled to nightmare. The fact that they feel like fantasy is a feature, not a bug. They sit precisely at the boundary where intuition says no, and physics says, if you do everything right, maybe. What should we learn from their disappearance? That success can be exquisitely conditional. You can solve the hardest problem, the square cube law of flight, so well that you become ordinary at it, as routine as a heron's stalk, and still lose when the world changes faster than bodies can. That isn't a moral failure, it's a map of contingency. Evolution is not a ladder, it's a search. The best answer on Monday can be the worst on Tuesday if the question changes. Birds were not more noble. They were positioned differently when the dice rolled. The giants were not doomed by hubris. They were caught by physics of a different sort. Sunlight blocked, air cooled, food gone. What we gain from their memory is permission to imagine and a caution to prepare. They show how far design by selection can push matter toward a goal. Wings that fold into legs, necks that act like cranes, skins that think in fibre angles. They also show how fragile a solved problem can be when the environment that made it solvable disappears. When we build things that must endure, aircraft, power grids, food systems, we can borrow both halves of the lesson, load paths that are honest and efficient, and redundancies that let us pivot when a rare day becomes the new normal. If you stand in front of a skeletal mount and follow the long beak out past the museum glass, it's easy to picture a horizon line, some late Cretaceous afternoon, and an animal deciding, as it did 1,000 times before, that the light is right and the air is ready. A crouch, a vault, a wing that becomes a road. They shouldn't have existed if you ask intuition. They certainly did if you ask rock. And though the sky no longer holds their shadows, the world still carries their fingerprints, in how we fly, in how we think about limits, and in the quiet knowledge that the possible is bigger than it looks, right up until the day it isn't. Somewhere in the rock a footprint pauses, 4 neat impressions, a tall shadow that no longer falls. That is all the proof we get that the sky once belonged to something that walked like a heron and rose like a sail. They shouldn't have existed, our intuition keeps insisting, and yet for millions of quiet afternoons they did. What they leave us isn't just wonder, it's a blueprint. Put strength where the forces flow, spend energy only when the air won't help, become large by becoming light. In their bones and membranes is a reminder that impossible is often a bookkeeping error. Solve each small constraint honestly and the big miracle arrives on its own. Their ending is a caution too. You can perfect a way of living and still lose when the question changes. Success is conditional. Resilience is the margin. The giants teach both lessons at once. Design like a realist, dream like a flyer, and never forget the weather can flip the board. So picture one last launch, a poised crouch, a vault, a wing that turns sunlight into distance. The silhouette shrinks until it's only a moving comma on the horizon, then nothing. If you ever doubt what life can do with time and pressure, remember the flying giraffes. The world said no, physics said maybe, evolution said yes.